our YouTube channel. And the Zoom link should have been invited. I'll add it on Discord, but if you go to our YouTube channel, the live stream is
I added the YouTube channel on the chat right now.
Thank you. So you should all follow this YouTube channel, subscribe.
And the live stream just started. So if we're ready, when we're ready.
Biaina, please let me know if the background noise is too.
We don't hear anything, Johanna, don't worry.
I do, it's so loud.
It's good for. Okay, you tell us whenever.
Elisa or Henry, would you like to say a few words about the school before we get started?
No, Bianna, go ahead and start the presentation. Thank you.
Well, I would just welcome Jocelyn and Johanna. Super happy that you guys are starting the spring semester lecture series, and excited to see the work that is coming.
Great, thanks so much for the invitation. We're very happy to share and receive comments and feedbacks around the world. So lovely to be with you.
I'll just say a few words. Sorry for the contrast. So we have been planning this exhibition and this talk for the past few months, and we're really excited about not only learn about your work, but also hear about the journey that it took. So your title is very provocative. So we're really interested in the range that you'll be covering, and along with that, our students are gonna be able to visit the exhibition in the next coming weeks, and which will be up in our Miami Beach studios for them to visit. So please feel free to also talk about the journey that your work and the exhibition has taken, and looking forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I will start sharing. Sorry. Apologize.
Before it ran, now it's good. Great.
I'm going to. Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation, Biaina. I can't believe that it came about finally. It is our pleasure to be here with you, even if it's only remotely. So I will just quickly introduce ourselves. Jocelyn Froimovich is an architect based currently in Munich, but is practicing in quite a few countries, and it's currently designing a wonderful library project in Milan. And I am currently a lecturer at the University of Liverpool. And we have been developing the How Do We Live research program, gosh, since 5 years now. And we have arrived to a stage where the 5 years of work and exercise came to start really telling the story that we went through. And just a little introduction: the How Do We Live program aims to negotiate the practical, theoretical, and speculative aspects of housing design. And we attempt to bridge through design between the conceptual, technical problematics that allow us to rethink housing for future urbanities. And the program finds itself in the forms of research, teaching, exhibits, publications, and events, such as this talk, or a symposium we had recently at the Venice Biennale. The next step of this program, as the sort of 5 years of research really prompted the awareness and critical thinking towards housing design, is to launch very soon a housing master's in London, based at the University of Liverpool, with the title MSc in Global Housing Design. It's a collaborative project between 3 universities: Universidad, Católica de Chile, University of Liverpool, and Jiaotong University in Suzhou. The first phase of this program is what we call the, I don't know, is it, yeah, is the How Do We Live Santiago, London, Shanghai, which is a research and teaching collaboration investigating the current housing production spanning across 3 continents, looking at housing types and the notion of crisis particular to each metropolitan context. As a research, it's a comparative study. It's what we like to call a classification exercise on design problems of housing through a multiscalar lens, highlighting the reciprocal relationship between the city, its housing types, homes, and its inhabitants.
So one of the formats in which we have worked is exhibitions. These exhibitions have organized the material that, having looked at over 1,000 case studies in these 3 cities, and we condensed what we had been looking at into 108 case studies. So the first exhibition we did was at the 12th International Sao Paulo Biennale, which was called Every Day, and we were in the infrastructures part of the exhibition. And then after this, we presented in the 17th Venice Architectural Biennale. You're looking here at the exhibition that will be also at your school. The project discusses today's banal housing types, exemplary of a particular city in its making. By looking at the market offer, the goal is to observe, analyze, participate, and hopefully also interfere in the production system of the urban. Rather than dismissing examples of the current housing offer as bastard architecture, it is assumed that these housing types portray specific subjects, their living and urban conditions, the politics, policies, and socioeconomic factors that lead into developing a particular urban setting. So we have created this range of different examples. We have selected them and analyzed them, and this model, which is also part of the exhibit, but unfortunately wasn't able to travel to you, shows what we call the ubiquitous unit, which is a particular consistent type of merged unit that we've invented by describing what we have seen is common in the 3 cities we've observed. The conclusion then of this model is to critique the current offer, the housing offer, as very basically similar in all 3 cities.
Yeah, maybe it's important that to mention that the exhibition that is going to travel to you is our latest iteration of the exhibit, which includes both the analytical part of the research and the sort of manipulation of the typological repertoire that we presented. So we also have launched quite recently in November our website, the howdowelive.com. It's still in development because we view it as a dynamic index, and it's a platform for us to invite a wider audience to partake in this discussion about the current housing production. This shows the case studies that are currently classified both as design operation and the case studies representing the last 10 years of production in these 3 cities. This website is quite important for us because first we believe that urban housing today demands architects to take a stance, and current urban dynamics back for a debate. It is in moments of political inflection when the status quo can be discussed. Housing design, both through policies and the buildings themselves, are a public affair. We also define, this is just maybe in brackets, housing as a sort that is continuously repeated, never include in our selection the sort of one-of-a-kind client-tailored house. It is the stuff that cities are made of. And we believe housing is and should be the primary occupation of architects.
So I will briefly sorry?
Yeah, maybe just one addition. Sorry, the slides are in a little bit different order. So the first stage of the exhibits, if we can maybe briefly go back, the analysis part is the 108 case study classified, and below that is the repertoire of 54 typological manipulation, all classified into design operations, and then we also identified 24 themes we call itineraries through which we interrogate these case studies.
Yes, so here we can see the analysis part that was presented in the Sao Paulo Biennales, where we identified 6 major types that we can see here, and then in each city went through each of these major types and identified more closely types that were consistent to that particular city. So detached high-rise compounds, detached medium-rise compounds, low-rise compounds, then became specific types identifying how were these types developed in that particular urban setting. And then we can see, for instance, in London, we can see the detached tower as the particular type that we selected within the high-rise category. And here are some examples of the kind of analysis that we did for each of our case studies. So the Baltimore Tower was one of our case studies, Douglas Tower, One Park Drive. These kind of format allowed us to compare one-to-one all the case studies that we selected, analyzing the urban setting, its imagery, the kind of buildings, building systems, materials, the layout of the individual units, etc. So this template we used to analyze every case study in each of these cities. Here we're looking at Santiago. The kind of building that we analyzed within the high-rise, isolated high-rise, is very different than the one from London. This is the high-density slab, so it's a very compact type of building with a single corridor, different cores, and single units along a corridor. You can see all these types analyzed here. It's a very particular kind of compressed, hyperdense type. And now looking at Shanghai-Suzhou, we looked at the mixed-use tower as a very extreme example of mixed use within a high-rise system. It was super interesting to see the differences amongst these buildings and how mixed use could develop within a vertical stacked system, and how these different programs reached the ground level and the underground level. And so all these gave a lot of material to analyze and then understand, so that we could fast forward into design categories, let's call them.
So as Jocelyn explained, our presentation and you will see that in the exhibition, followed rows representing cities and columns representing types. And certain itineraries, as we call them, themes through which we started to compare and further interrogate our case studies, and which allowed us to also establish consistencies and particularities. So these issues, these problems and themes, for example, included sites, boundaries, density, intensity, iconicity, circulation, real estate market, materials, construction systems, layouts, just to name a couple. Jos, you're up.
Yeah, yes, there's a little bit delay in the but now are good. So sites, basically, we would like to expand on this theme with you, just to give you an example of how the system of the exhibition works. We left cards in the middle of the space for you to take as if it were your guide through the exhibition. And then in this theme, on one side, you can look at the examples that have been selected and discuss through the reading of these examples this particular issue. And then we thought that sites could be an operative term for us to think of design proposals, to fast forward ideas on how to participate of the question of the site. And we have selected some of the students' work and some of the proposals to discuss the idea of infill. We use the notion of infill as a common term to all of these projects. Some have worked in the backyard of specific buildings so as to propose new sites within the urban fabric. Some projects discuss rooftops as another possible site. Land strips have been also infilled through different type of projects. And then we can see in the following underground, I don't know if it's, yeah, this is still the land strip. We have underground as another way of infilling sites, with density being also a very important theme to be discussed within these projects. All these projects are student projects that have happened throughout these years in the 3 cities that we've also been discussing. So we take the cities as our base for analysis, basically.
And this connects back to how we actually started the research project. We're not going to expand on that too much, but our interest started with questioning housing design through how housing has been taught, and looking at the major 20th century paradigm shift that still till today define the way we think about housing and the way we operate when it comes to design. We looked at several housing studios, specifically starting with the most seminal ones at the Bauhaus, and then continuing at the IIT in Illinois, both in Chicago, sorry, both Mies van der Rohe and Ludwig Hilbersheimer's studios. And we looked at these studios as a way to understand how certain ideas, design operation and problems were thematized. On this, during this archival investigation, we came across a fascinating movie called How Do We Live? Healthily and Economically. The movie was directed and commissioned by the Bauhaus and produced by Walter Gropius. And it was first shown in 1926 at the opening ceremonies of the Bauhaus building, with Berlin at its focus. And the intention was to raise awareness of the housing crisis and to publicize the Bauhaus solutions to this housing crisis. It's divided into 4 parts, very didactic. First, about the crisis, the housing shortage, then the proposals, the new house, the new living, the new lifestyles, and the construction methods, as in its final chapter, that facilitates that. It's important to mention that the movie was presented in such a way that could involve all stakeholders of the housing production, developers, politicians, laymen, academics, etc. And this is very important for us in developing our pedagogic approach, and as a form of investigation. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll keep going.
No, it's fine. As a form of investigation, just please go.
So the idea through these workshops that we have developed in these 3 cities, we have understood these workshops as a way to fast forward ideas, design ideas about housing. We understand that housing studios are part of every architecture school curriculum, but these studios contain residual thinking. Preconceived notions are still part of the way in which we are taught and we still teach housing studios. Notions such as spatial efficiency, programmatic and private versus public segregation are some of the modernist inheritances that we should start questioning. And these workshops have allowed to very easily, let's say, fast forward ideas and think through these notions again. So we have been running workshops in Santiago, London, and Shanghai with titles such as Types and Neighborhoods, Types and Density, Ownership, Material and Technologies, Transience, ideas that can trigger thoughts about design.
And in order to face these questions and expand the pedagogical scope of the housing design studios, the topic of the workshop series, How Do We Live, was explored by fragmenting current questions on housing design into 4 themes. These include crisis as method, types as context, language as politics, and our last and our current research program, which is How Do We Live Now? These questions or these themes were the panels of our recent symposium in Venice that we will talk a little bit more. I think it's very important to probably say how important, and the symposium brought this out even more, this multiscalar lens through which we look at housing design and housing production. I would say multiscalar and reciprocal lens, where the city, its housing types, the homes and its inhabitants are understood as part of a system, whereby both the urban and its dwellers are mutually and retroactively produced. So
So the first notion that it's really critical for us is crisis. Crisis is understood as a turning point, a time when a difficult or very important decision must be made. The term forces us as designers to recognize certain design problems and therefore propose design solutions. With this, we want to question what defines the housing crisis of these cities today, By forcing the notion of crisis as a methodology with our students, we look at existing housing policies, types, and try to question and analyze them.
Types. So housing design operates through variation, iteration, and mutation of prior examples. Housing types can provide a framework to deal with complex urban variables. By understanding the particulars in the production of a housing type, the architect can manipulate, reorganize, and ultimately invent. Rather than dismissing the current housing offer as bastard architecture, we have analyzed housing types in their cities and reflected on how these portray specific subjects, their living and urban conditions, as well as the politics, policies, socio-economic factors that lead into their development.
Language politics. We look at housing as a project and as a project of and for the masses. Housing's public exposure through public and private discourses may unfold a deeper analysis on all stakeholders. If debates and advertisement are discussed on behalf of argumentative thinking and design, looking into how housing has been portrayed in these cities may offer an opportunity to rethink architecture's eloquence.
And finally, the last panel during our symposium and our current inquiry is into and we will show some snippets very quickly towards the end of this half-cooked investigation that really looks at the recent history of how do we live now, housing performance and home working during lockdown and beyond is, as I said, it's an ongoing project.
This was our symposium that we, in November, that we had in Venice. We had panelists from every city come together virtually and physically. And it was super interesting to understand the boundaries of our work and how it could be broadened through particular researchers that have been studying housing from different perspectives and the crossovers between the cities that had never been compared before, basically. So the collision of ideas amongst participants was extremely productive, and this random, let's say, first random approach that we had turned to be extremely productive in the way different cities talk to one another and open eyes in terms of what are the current debates in each of them.
And yeah, so I don't know if we have time, maybe just show a couple of slides. Obviously, we all went through in various cities, in various forms of lockdown measure. And what we started discussing is to start identifying through a series of themes and classifying the ways in which lockdown measures have impacted the use of our homes. And of course, this will influence our housing preferences and working, living conditions within our homes after years to come. And we proposed in the panel discussion a as a way to investigate of the appropriateness of each city's housing stock and urbanities for this intensive 24-hour use that and for the future housing design, how this will impact. Obviously, homeworking and schooling, sick for care for the sick and the elderly has become a sort of quasi-permanent feature in many people's lives. And as I said, it will likely to influence our housing preferences. And what we are looking in the first, how we experience this change, how it changed our way we occupied and used our home, and what is their ability where is the ability of our current housing stock to adapt. Just, do you wanna just highlight a couple of these themes?
Right, we have again started a classification exercise aiming to catalog events and how our homes have changed as a way to construct a recent history of our transformed urban lives. We have only looked at London and how London has developed throughout this last years. And we will very quickly snap through the collection of images that you saw first have been classified from different media sources that are open to everyone and that allow us to see through our contested and changing homes in this new setting. We are looking at TV features, advertising, and archives that allow us to look into people's homes without necessarily being able to go in them. We have witnessed how bedrooms, kitchens, bathrooms, and conservatories have been transformed into makeshift offices, gyms, schools, broadcasting studios, how communal balconies have been appropriated as storage spaces, meeting facilities, exercise rooms and playgrounds, music rehearsal and performance spaces, and much more. So all these images are a way for us to give a narrative to these new ways of occupying our homes and our environments throughout these 2 years. And analyzing these records has highlighted programmatic, spatial, socio-political conditions that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. This could potentially lead us...
And how new typologies have evolved.
So this could potentially lead us to identifying specific needs and generating a repository of immediate as-found solutions and inventions to requalify homes. Thank you very much. So this has been a very broad and open-ended, let's say, portrait of how we've developed our work so far. Biaina specifically requested that we looked at the transition of how we started and how we have been developing the program, and it would be great to discuss it with you and receive comments and questions.
Thank you very much. And this was really great, just to also use this as a way to start to read the exhibition. So I hope students will be able to use this as a reference. So I want to see if anybody has a question to begin. Otherwise, I have a few lined up that I'll ask.
I think there are.
I have a question for anyone belonging to the professors, let's say. So how is it taught within the school? Is it part of the a basic program? Is it a specific studio? How is it? Because we're very interested in understanding how housing is set up within the school system, let's say, the topic.
I don't know if Jason is up, but if not, I can answer. So in the midsection in Design 6, we have a dedicated infill housing studio that basically explore ideas on sort of urban context, and is based in the city of Savannah in Georgia. We actually did go this last weekend. We came back on Sunday, and students have to analyze some building mass, carriage houses, the whole sort of configuration of the city. And they do a carriage house as a sort of an exercise of almost as an accessory dwelling unit, as an ADU, and then the main house, which houses multiple units, not just one. So it's not a single family home. And then they do sort of precedent analysis and sort of related exercises that go along with that.
And is it like a local-based type of analysis, or is it more like design precedents from all over?
No, it's very open. There was a year actually that it was also connected to the study abroad program that we have in Japan. So students analyzed Japanese, the little houses, sort of like a full library of references, because those students were going later that year to Japan and will visit some of those houses. So the analysis in that case was about the sort of the small housing unit, but it also part of the list of precedents is European models and American, and yeah, so it's very broad and very up to date. Like it's a lot of like the sort of contemporary practices in France and in Spain and in Italy. So it's, you know.
Yes, it's very interesting how currently it's inevitable, even though we not necessarily like the term global, it's inevitable to think housing in a global perspective, and how basically how much can we learn from other modes of living and from typologies that have emerged elsewhere, how much can they impact different localities around, and it's quite inevitable, I think. So that's part of how we have been actually developing, even though we thought in the beginning that we could keep these cities as separate kind of exercises and think of them individually. It was inevitable to cross-reference and think through them in tandem. I don't know how the questions work.
I'd like to jump in, and Jocelyn, Johanna, thank you very much for this presentation. It's a very ambitious project, and I've been looking at the website and the way you've categorized each project, each building, its location, at least not its location in the city, but yes, the context, the pattern that it has in its surroundings. I just have maybe 2 or 3 questions embedded in the same one, which is, what is the criteria for selecting these various case studies that you've gone into more deeply? For example, I don't see any single family detached housing. I don't see anything that represents suburbia. I don't see anything that represents informal settlements. I don't see anything that represents like communal or co-op type models of housing. So it seems to be a certain let's say umbrella or frame of housing that you're actually interested in. Another aspect is the socioeconomic factors surrounding each of these sites. I mean, Santiago has very stark differences socioeconomically between the North and the South, for example. Or, I don't know Shanghai, but I posit it would be similar. And how do you feel that this speaks to that? Or maybe it's an outside factor that is outside of, you're looking at typologies more than what it does to people, or how it empowers people. And the third part of this question has to do then with pedagogies, which you raised in the context of the Bauhaus. But I wonder if you've also found other models. I mean, the Bauhaus is a white, very Eurocentric model that has been, highly contested. And I think you guys present it in a critical way. So, the way that spaces are configured designs people. And I find that is an avenue to explore in pedagogies, but I'm not sure which is exactly the interest in pedagogies that you guys are delving into more specifically.
I'm happy to jump in to start responding to the first part of the question, and then Jocelyn from where I left out. So first question is the methodology, if I understand you're interested in how we made the selection. So we were very keen, and it was quite some time when we honed into this one particular process. We were very interested in what is on offer currently in these cities. So we started.
By offer, do you mean supply?
What is on offer, what is available for buy or to rent. And we were also wanted to look at only new build, because we were interested in the current production. So it's roughly between 10 in some cases. There are some examples that are older, but roughly this is the 10-15 years was the cutoff point. And we looked at in every city the most popular real estate websites, which offers both to buy and for rent. And in each city, we went by spend across neighborhoods, and started collecting examples. And those examples started to form into a typological classification. But here we were very keen on, we only looked at, in terms of initial classification, their sort of morphology, the density that they produce, and the sort of lifestyles they offer. So in each city, I would say we went over 1,000 examples that got narrowed down into in the final exhibition for 36. So this is what's on offer now in 2 or 3 most popular sites as new build. So that was our way of avoiding our own preconceptions to guide the classification. That was the let's say the most unbiased way that we could come up with, collecting this repertoire. So we do have detached, but mostly semi-detached houses. I believe the last category, the low-rise compound, includes detached and semi-detached villa houses, but the ones that are repeated. And those are, with the exception of Suzhou, are suburban types, both in Santiago and in London. They are peripheral typologies, really defining the current suburban sprawl. And of course, in each city, identifying the neighborhoods was a different task. In Santiago, we went according to districts. In London, we went by districts and the so-called opportunity areas, which currently produce the largest number of housing units. That's according to London planning. So I don't know if this answers your question in relation to the selection and how they were obtained.
I want to add this. Lisa, I don't know if this helped like understanding why did we select what we selected, but maybe a way to also help understand our approach is that we are very interested in producing better designers through our workshops. Let's try to think through how we design, and therefore looking at what is designed by firms today and what is produced by firms today allows us to target design strategies in a much more direct manner. And this has to do with, I think, your question about how do we construct the pedagogical aspect of our program. So we really want students, all colors and ages and nationalities alike, to take the role of designers as a very active one. And I think that it is through design that we think through the problems of housing together with them. We have been teaching all our workshops with students from the 3 cities, coming from Chile to Shanghai and from London to Shanghai and vice versa. So we like to mix up different upbringings and cultures, so that the typological orientation of the type being our starting point allows us to tackle the outcome, the design outcome, at the very beginning of our design questioning. Let's say we bring the outcome, the design outcome, to the foreground as much as possible. As to how do we construct the place or space of our pedagogies, I think it's been extremely random, and we are very happy to be welcomed in different places and spaces. So we adapt as we go along, and we have been given different, let's say, different types of atmospheres and opportunities throughout the times that we have taught. And I think it's part of, well, definitely after COVID, it's part of the beauty of teaching how to adapt to being without a place, without a space necessarily.
And I have one last response to the very, very good question about why do we talk about Bauhaus, and why did we even look at it? And I think it's a very, very good one. And the very simple question is that what we identified that in fact some of the design problems and the way in which we talk about housing is filled with modernist inheritances. And in order to look at where these inheritances were created, we were interested in the root and the sort of more seminal studios where this language and the way in which we talk about housing stems from. So that's where our inquiry started. It's important, as Jocelyn said, this is not we are not historians. We are interested in design, but we are interested in also history as a way to critique and develop that sort of a critical approach that is absolutely present in the workshop themes. So not necessarily in the selection of the case studies, but the way in which we interrogate it when the political, the socio-economic factors come in, and where, for example, in our workshop on ownership, particularly interrogated ways in which new modes of ownership and new modes of development, just as a response to cooperatives.
There's a question by Thomas, or a comment, I think, about the Bauhaus. Please, it's hard to see hands raised because...
Yeah, thank you. Do you hear my voice?
Yes.
Yes, I'm Thomas Spiegelhalter, faculty colleague at FIU, and also had an excellent video presentation and discussion at the Venice Biennale, so I know your work. And as a German-born architect and engineer and town planner, I wanted to say that for at least 20 years, most architects don't care about the Bauhaus in Germany because things have changed, critically changed. We see architecture, and I have also an office in Berlin, by the way, now, and I'm building large-scale neighborhoods and buildings and retrofits. As you know, we have the challenges of climate change. So the typologies that we have been building and maintaining for the last decades, most of them failed. We have to see them in the context. Amenities, access to amenities, schools, kindergartens, public transportation, bike lanes, daycare, etc., etc. These are the indicators, one of many. And many other indicators are, so what are those buildings consuming in terms of resources? Not just natural resources. How do we calculate the resource wars if non-renewable energy and material resources are used to maintain them or operate them? These are the criteria expressed in the politics, in the new government, for example, in Germany, and has an impact of the society and the professional organizations. And I think this is what we need to teach students and help them. Here at FIU, Henry already explained what the housing project is doing in the lower semesters. Now in the upper semesters, we are using AI-assisted generative design and topological optimization tools with GIS to analyze the context and then the buildings itself and look at the performance. For example, in France, Germany, Denmark, no one will rent an apartment in any of these typologies if they do not pass the resource energy passport. Everyone has a right to see how much it costs to rent, to buy a building in Berlin, in Paris, wherever you go, and how close they are to public transportation, to daycare, etc., etc. I think this is extremely important, and we have the tools today to do so. In particular, the younger generation has access. They are trained. They train them in the daycare and the kindergarten already, how to save resources and adapt to the environment. I think this is what we need to teach the students. So the Bauhaus is practically dead in most of the brains of the education in Europe, except we add those experiences to these new challenges of survival. This is what I needed to say.
Yes, thanks, Thomas. I would like to maybe be more open about what are we interested in terms of the historical precedents. We will all agree, I think, that notions of spatial efficiency, in particular, let's say, let's take a very close example so that we can maybe discuss in more grounded terms. The bathrooms. Bathrooms have been discussed in terms of efficiency and hit exactly what you were discussing. The way in which we discuss, design, and operate bathrooms hit the way in which buildings, housing buildings, perform in all terms, economic, material terms, and the inheritance of how to think bathrooms is tied together historically to the way in which bathrooms started being analyzed and discussed in terms of design in the Bauhaus as the eminent place where efficiency was brought at the foreground of our discipline. And if we have been looking at different projects with students where we question the necessity of thinking bathrooms as individual cells located in inner cores, and we have analyzed how we can disentangle this inheritance and think different ways in which we could relocate bathrooms that and alter the preconceived idea of how the bathroom should be designed, located, laid out in current buildings. So this linkage, historical linkage, allows us to really combat or go against, in a way, the preconceived notions that have us doing again and again the same type of rehearsals, design rehearsals, without, and of course we have tools to analyze the outcome. We have analyzed a lot the outcomes of these buildings. We have improved the performances throughout the last years, but we haven't necessarily questioned the core of their designs as much. I don't think so. And that's our take, at least. So we've been trying to disentangle those basic layouts and those very preconceived notions so that we can rediscuss housing in terms of new family types, non-family types, transient modes of living, and other ways that could help us rethink the way we inhabit the city. And of course, your comment on the scales of this problem is at the core of our discussion. And that's why in our symposium, we really discuss this with all sorts of stakeholders, from urbanists to sociologists. So we're very interested in the different scales and repercussions of the problem of housing.
Well, it needs structural systems, sanitary systems, AC systems, etc., passive active systems need to be included. Are they able to accept more loads and schedules of occupancy changes? Is it a plug-and-play infrastructure? How is the infrastructure connected to the public infrastructure? What is the age? What is the life cycle? All these things can today be pulled in through tools in not in minutes, but at least let's be conservative, in an hour. So when we do case studies, we do those with the help of digital tools. And we look at the performance and how do they work. And that's exactly what's happening in professional offices. It's not the PowerPoint presentation or the nice images, it's a performance analysis and how much capacity, schedule changes, load profiles can be altered or applied to, which is very much the professional workflow in any office. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
wanna
Good
take the
afternoon,
camera
good
away from
afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. If I may, this is Hernan Guerrero Applewhite. Don't have my camera on because I'm in my car. Apologies, but I was very curious, intrigued by your presentation. I look forward to seeing the exhibit. I think it's I appreciate you starting with the Bauhaus, especially because I think our own school of architecture here, tried to emulate, the Bauhaus, at least in the appearance of the building, and maybe even so in the philosophical approach at some point. And I agree that it's important to start where things began. I'm also really intrigued by looking at architecture that's been built over the last 15 years, because there has been a particular typology built across the world, right, over the last 15 to 20 years. And so, I really appreciate both Elisa and Thomas's questions. Elisa really helped you all answer some of the questions that I was framing in my mind. But I think it's also important to look at this architecture objectively, because there is a specific way that architecture is responding more to market demands, and I don't know if it's market demands or the demands of developers specifically, and I think to the detriment of architecture in and of itself. So I think it's a really important exercise to kind of show, hey, this is what is being offered, just as kind of like a base level, to have something to measure up against. I guess my last question would be: Are you looking to add additional cities? How do you see this? How do you see your investigation evolving?
Jos, you wanna?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I need to switch on the light.
Thanks, Nan, for your comments, and of course, we appreciate we also think it's very important to see what is currently been built as our responsibility in a way. So that's part of what we're trying to do, not see this as outside of the profession, but very much part of our profession, and see these examples not as like the black sheep, but actually being designed. We don't want to look outside of this so that we can be more suited with more fancy or more glossy looking buildings. We actually want to take advantage of all these of all this work, so that we can be more make these more accessible, so as to discuss the tools through which we become designers. And it is, I think, to the benefit of the profession to take these as part of what we produce, and not as foreign, let's say, as the fault of others. And that because if we train ourselves to understand the rules of the game in which these buildings are produced, then we become better at manipulating those rules and making these exercises that can benefit from different design approaches. I think just the fact that there is such similarity between the case studies that we have chosen, tells us about how we have failed in terms of broadening the spectrum of the answers we give through housing. And only if we allow students to gather tools that can help broaden the spectrum of design tools and design answers, we have achieved something. And that not necessarily has to do with the appearance of the building, but as Thomas was saying, with the performance of the building and how these layouts talk to lives that have been changing throughout the last century radically.
And responding to, or maybe expanding on what Jocelyn is saying, this is a constant debate amongst us, because one could argue that a very good portion of this offer and of this repertoire are not necessarily built for people to live in. It's obviously through the commodification of housing, a very large portion is only built for investment. And we have this reoccurring debate: is it even a housing problem? But I think Jocelyn is very strong in making that point repeatedly, that since it is there and it is built, and we have to do something with it, and I think it's therefore part of and should be part of the discussion. And the quick answer to your question of what is our next stop. We are currently in conversation with the University of Venice of doing a workshop. And we have two other cities that we've been actively discussing. One is Kolkata, and also in the near future, possibly Cape Town. So we are sort of without any a comparison, but these are possible schools and cities that we sort of started looking into. Just, do you want to add anything to this?
I will have to jump out. I'll be back in a second, but I'll be listening.
Yes.
I do have a question if I can ask.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So having seen the process of workshop conducting that you've done, the preparation, even setting up the exhibition, as an outsider, as somebody who's interested in data, when I'm looking at your research, at least for me, I'm less interested in the specifics of the context, because I do look at it with an understanding that this is an ever-evolving database. So when I look at your what you have produced here, in a sense, it's I think it's perhaps for me, it's more interesting to look at it as an archiving process and as a certain research methodology that you're putting forward. And ultimately, when we're thinking about archives, and this is something that recently Benjamin Bratton, who talks about quite a lot about data and artificial intelligence, he was referring to archives as a way of sampling and preparing for future investigation, which for me, it ties back to Walter Gropius's kind of this initiation of the movie, How Do We Live? In a sense, creating a movie is a way to begin to create a promise to the future, and in a sense, making a commitment and being accountable to the archive production. So in a sense, when I look at what you have presented here, it's not so much about the specifics of the content, but beginning to really think about us as architects or urban designer, beginning to really understand the accountability that we need to take by creating, let's say, a specific slices that then we can better analyze. In a sense, this is nothing new to the field. A lot of, let's say, historical research comes from this process of archiving, which I'm sure you've gone through extensively. But I wonder if you can talk about the cultural component of creating this archive, right? So committing to a movie production with a very specific name that you've borrowed almost 100 years later, right? In a sense, this revival is a commitment to a different type of accountability. So I was wondering if you can talk about that aspect.
Ooh, that's a very big question. I think what we the way we think about analysis, I guess, has to always do with numbers and the vast repository of examples. And I'm not sure that I'm answering your question, but I think that for us, classification and typology is really to organize and systematize certain problems that emerge from any set of examples in any era. And we are interested in looking at how do we live now, obviously. And therefore, we set up this index. I'm not 100% sure it is about classification, and it is an index, and it is a repository. I am not sure at this point I would call it an archive, and I have to think about it a little bit.
I disagree with you, but I think we can debate this later, because I think when you are starting from a certain type of precedent, which is the Bauhaus, and kind of adopting the cultural, let's say, the specific responsibility that production of content and exhibition that bears. I think already you are kind of you are committing to something more than just another database. So I mean, and it goes back to, like, I compare it to the type of work that I do with data collection, and it's not always often about highlighting, let's say, the most accurate high resolution in one place, but really sometimes it's often about highlighting lack of availability of data. So we teach our students GIS as kind of a starting point as introduction to site. And what they really soon realize is that there's lack of availability of data. then we teach them a little bit about data collection. But I think the focus that you're putting forward, it lends itself to not only creating a new database, you're calling it an index, but by kind of highlighting the act of specifying a time frame, and highlighting perhaps issues that are arising by doing this comparative studies. So there is a very critical also, there is a criticism of contemporary methods.
Johanna, can I jump in very quickly? I completely follow your path of thought, and I couldn't agree more. I think the critical words in what you're saying to me, and they really resound very profoundly, have to do with data is not enough. We have to be able to select. Selection is crucial because we have to be able to produce argumentative thinking. And even if we have the most high resolution kind of database to the most specific case studies, we will never be able to have enough. Therefore, what you were establishing as, okay, we don't have enough data, and then where to find enough data, is exactly the kind of pattern that we go through when we analyze our case studies, because we would never produce enough data in order for this to become high resolution case studies. We just have to filter and select in order for this database to discuss and argument for the kind of design strategies that we're looking for. So being like doing this fast forward exercise has allowed us to become, let's say, better, or try to be better at highlighting the shortcuts, shortcuts that can lead from the analysis of data to a design proposal.
And just one last note, there's a famous media artist called Zach Lieberman, and he in terms of shortcuts, he says that often when it comes to creative process, shortcuts do become our styles. And so I really appreciate that combination unit that you put together in terms of shortcuts and how that becomes basically the style going forward. So I'm afraid that we are running out of time. So if there's any final questions, please include here. But with that, we're really happy that you got an opportunity to explain how might we be engaging with your exhibition, and really looking forward to engaging with it in the physical space and with the participatory components that you've set up for us to try to read your system in multiple different ways. So thank you again for sharing your time and sharing your content with us, and looking forward to providing our student feedback to you and see different future iterations.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
And a great discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
We have adjourned.